They never threatened her directly. That was the warning. In Washington City, danger didn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrived as absence. One morning she noticed it first in the hallway. Conversation stopped when she entered. Not abruptly, politely, as if nothing had been happening at all. She had lived her whole life reading rooms like this. Enslaved people learned early. Silence could scream. By the time Abraham Lincoln became president, she was already inside the White House. Not as a guest. Not as a figure in history books. As someone who worked close enough to power to feel its heat. She heard arguments before they became policy. She saw grief before it became speeches. She watched Mary Lincoln unravel in private, long before the public ever noticed. That proximity was dangerous. Not because she spoke, but because she remembered. Outside the White House, a different America was forming. Night rides, burned symbols, names whispered instead of written. The Ku Klux Klan didn't need to announce itself in Washington. Its presence was felt through influence, who lost work, who lost protection, who suddenly became controversial. One afternoon, a folded note appeared where she usually stood. No name, no seal. Just one sentence. Not everyone belongs everywhere. She didn't react, didn't show fear, didn't ask who left it. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket. Because she understood something the men who wrote it didn't. You don't warn someone you believe is powerless. You warn someone you're unsure how to remove. And from that moment on, she knew. They were watching her. Inside the most powerful house in America, a quiet line had been crossed. The note was only the beginning. After that, the pressure changed shape. She noticed how quickly her name vanished from conversations where it once mattered. Decisions she had quietly influenced were now made without her presence. Doors didn't slam, they simply stopped opening. This was how power disciplined without leaving marks. Rumors followed next. Soft ones, carefully phrased. She repeats things. She listens too much. She's grown ambitious. Ambition was a dangerous accusation for a black woman in 1860s America. It didn't need proof. It only needed repetition. Mary Lincoln sensed the shift, too. There were days when the First Lady spoke to her as if clinging to something familiar. Other days her eyes carried suspicion, planted by voices Mary trusted more than truth. Those voices didn't mention the Klan. They didn't have to. Influence was cleaner than intimidation. Then came the warning, delivered indirectly, the way threats always were. A man who had once greeted her warmly leaned close and whispered, "People are asking questions about you." Not what she had done, not what she planned. Why she was still allowed to stand so near power. That question followed her everywhere. In the corridors, in the kitchens, in the glances exchanged behind her back. Outside, the country fractured. Inside, she became a fracture no one wanted to acknowledge. She understood the strategy now. If they couldn't remove her physically, they would remove her socially. If they couldn't silence her voice, they would make it dangerous for others to listen. And yet, they never confronted her directly. Because direct confrontation meant recognition. And recognition was something they were still afraid to give her. Isolation crept in quietly. Not all at once, piece by piece. a meeting she was no longer invited to, a recommendation that never arrived, a favor once promised, suddenly forgotten. It wasn't random. It was coordinated. She began to understand the deeper danger. They weren't trying to make her afraid. They were trying to make her irrelevant. That was how reputations were erased in Washington. But she adapted. She stopped speaking openly and started listening more carefully, not just to words, to patterns. Who avoided her after certain conversations, who suddenly repeated phrases she had once heard behind closed doors, who reacted too quickly when she entered a room. She began to keep mental records, not gossip, not speculation, facts. Because facts made people nervous. The Ku Klux Klan never sent riders to her door. They didn't need to. Their influence lived in the social fabric, in who was considered respectable, in who was described as troublesome, in who could be quietly discarded without explanation. Then the newspaper piece appeared. Short, carefully worded, unnamed. It suggested that certain attendants had grown too close to matters beyond their station, that loyalty could not be assumed. No name was printed. Everyone knew whose it was. She read the article once, then again, and something shifted. They were no longer testing her fear. They were measuring how dangerous she might become. Because if she truly had nothing to hide, why were they trying so hard to discredit her? And if she did have something to reveal, that was a thought that made powerful men uncomfortable. Everything changed the night Abraham Lincoln died. The White House went silent in a way she had never felt before. Not grief, vacuum. Power shifted instantly. Alliances collapsed overnight. People who had once protected each other began protecting only themselves. And she understood the danger immediately. Lincoln had been a shield, imperfect, but real. Without him, everyone reassessed risk, including her. The tone toward her hardened, not openly, administratively. Her duties were reduced, her access limited, her usefulness quietly questioned. This wasn't chaos. It was calculation. Behind closed doors, a new narrative formed. She stayed too long. She knows things that don't concern her. She might talk. That last word mattered most, because silence could be managed. Speech could not. The Klan's influence pressed closer now, not through violence, but through consequence. Supporters distanced themselves. Former allies avoided being seen with her. Social exile began. Invitations disappeared. Names stopped appearing on lists. Opportunities dissolved without explanation. She felt it everywhere. This was how they punished without fingerprints. And still, no one laid a hand on her. Not because they didn't want to. Because touching her would confirm what they were trying to deny. That she mattered enough to fear. By now, the rumors were louder than the truth. They didn't accuse her directly. They suggested. She exaggerates her role. She inserts herself into history. She benefits from proximity. Reputational assassination. Clean, legal, effective. Newspapers stopped mentioning her name. Memoirs rewrote events with careful omissions. Her presence was erased line by line. An erasure is not accidental. It is coordinated. The KKK understood something most people missed. You don't have to destroy someone physically if you can destroy the record of their existence. Donors withdrew quietly. Income streams collapsed without warning. What had once been stability turned fragile. Economic punishment followed social exile. She downsized. Then again. Not because she was powerless, but because power without protection bleeds slowly. And yet, she didn't disappear. That unsettled them, because survival itself became defiance. Every time she showed up in public, it forced a calculation. Ignore her, and she might speak. Confront her, and confirm fear. So they did neither. They watched, and watching turned into frustration, because she never gave them what they wanted most. A mistake. She documented everything. Letters, dates, conversations, absences. Not for revenge, for permanence. History would not remember them kindly, but it would remember that they tried. And that terrified them more than any speech ever could. In the end, they never touched her. Not because they didn't want to, not because they lacked reach, but because every path toward her carried a cost they couldn't control. By then, whispers about why she was avoided had grown louder than the lies meant to erase her. Silence, paradoxically, became proof. People noticed the gaps, the missing mentions, the careful avoidance of her name. An absence invites curiosity. Former allies began asking questions, quietly. Historians compared drafts. Contradictions surfaced. The KKK's greatest weapon had always been fear. But fear only works when it stays invisible. Once people sense it, it loses its grip. They had tried intimidation without fingerprints. They had tried social suffocation. They had tried economic pressure. What they couldn't survive was her refusal to react the way they expected. No public breakdown, no dramatic confrontation, no scandal to exploit. Just persistence and documentation. Years later, when memoirs were re-examined and letters resurfaced, the pattern became undeniable. She wasn't absent from history. She had been pushed out. And that revelation damaged reputations more effectively than any accusation ever could. The men who tried to erase her, their names survived only in footnotes, often attached to words like cowardice and fear. Hers survived differently, not as a victim, not as a myth, but as a reminder of something the KKK never understood. Some power doesn't announce itself. It endures. And endurance is the one thing intimidation can't defeat. Before you leave, ask yourself this. If silence protected her, what does that say about the people who needed it? And